I never thought I would become the person my family couldn't recognize, the daughter who disappeared when they needed her most, the sister who chose ambition over love, the child who let her father die without saying goodbye. My name is Rebecca Thornton, and for the past 8 years, I have carried a weight so heavy that some mornings I forget how to breathe. This is not a story about someone who did wrong without knowing it. This is a confession from someone who knew exactly what she was doing, who made calculations instead of sacrifices, who looked at her family's pain and turned away because the life she wanted was waiting somewhere else. I chose myself over my family, and the guilt, the relentless, suffocating guilt, has never left me. It follows me into every room, sits beside me at every meal, and whispers to me in the darkness when sleep refuses to come. This is my truth, and I am finally ready to tell it. I grew up in a small town in northern Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business and your family history going back 3 generations. My father, William Thornton, owned a manufacturing plant that his own father had started in the 1960s. It wasn't a glamorous business. They made industrial parts, components for machines that built other machines, but it employed 200 people in a town that had few other options, and my father treated every single one of those workers like family. He was up before dawn every day, at the factory before anyone else, and he was the last to leave at night. He believed in hard work, in loyalty, in keeping your word even when it cost you something. He believed that family was everything, that blood was thicker than any opportunity or ambition. And for most of my childhood, I believed it too. My mother, Margaret, was the heart of our home. She raised 3 children while supporting a husband who was married to his work as much as he was married to her. She never complained, not once, not even when money was tight, or when my father missed another school play, or when the weight of holding everything together fell entirely on her shoulders. She made our small house feel like a castle. She made every holiday magical. She made us believe that we were the luckiest children in the world. Even when I knew, even as a child, that other families had more money, bigger houses, easier lives. My mother taught me that love was not about what you had, but about what you gave. I wish I had remembered that lesson when it mattered most. Daniel was 3 years younger than me, and Sarah was 5 years younger. As the oldest, I was expected to set an example. I was supposed to be the responsible one, the one who looked out for the others, the one who would eventually help my father run the family business. But from as early as I can remember, I wanted something different. I wanted out. I wanted a bigger life, a grander stage, a world where my name meant something beyond being Bill Thornton's daughter. I was ashamed of my small-town roots, though I never would have admitted it then. I was embarrassed by my father's calloused hands, by my mother's simple dresses, by the fact that we drove used cars and took vacations to state parks instead of Europe. I told myself I was better than this place. I told myself I was meant for something more. And that belief, that poisonous, arrogant belief, became the foundation for everything that followed. I was 17 when I decided I would become a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm in New York City. I had seen a movie about high-powered attorneys making deals in glass towers, wearing designer suits, commanding rooms with their intelligence and ambition. I wanted that life so desperately, I could taste it. I studied harder than anyone else in my class. I got perfect grades. I scored in the top percentile on my entrance exams. And when the acceptance letter came from Columbia Law School, full scholarship, I felt like my real life was finally beginning. My parents were proud, but confused. My father asked why I couldn't practice law in Ohio, maybe help with the business, handle contracts and labor disputes. My mother asked if I would come home for holidays, if I would still be there, Becca, even when I lived so far away. I said yes to everything. I promised everything. And I meant none of it. New York swallowed me whole. I loved every overwhelming minute of it. The noise, the crowds, the endless possibilities. I threw myself into law school with an intensity that left no room for anything else. I rarely called home. I missed Christmas my second year, claiming I had to study for exams. I missed my grandmother's funeral because I had a mock trial competition. Each time I chose my future over my family, it got easier. Each time I broke a promise, the guilt lasted a little shorter. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who didn't need a small town in Ohio to define her. By the time I graduated, top of my class, with a job offer from one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in Manhattan, I had almost convinced myself that my family was happy for me, proud of the woman I was becoming. I didn't see the hurt in my mother's eyes during our rare phone calls. I didn't hear the worry in my father's voice when he asked about my health. I only heard what I wanted to hear. I only saw what I wanted to see. The firm was everything I had dreamed of, and everything I should have feared. It was a beautiful machine designed to consume ambitious young lawyers and spit out partners or casualties, nothing in between. The hours were brutal. The competition was vicious. The rewards were intoxicating. Within 3 years, I was a senior associate, handling mergers and acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had an apartment overlooking Central Park. I wore clothes that cost more than my father made in a month. I dated men who appeared in business magazines and attended galas where champagne flowed like water. I had made it. I had escaped. I had become the person I always wanted to be. And if the price of that transformation was missing birthdays and forgetting to call and slowly, gradually, imperceptibly becoming a stranger to the people who had raised me, well, that was simply the cost of success. Everyone pays a price. I told myself that mine was reasonable. Marcus Webb was the senior partner who changed everything. He was 20 years older than me, brilliant and ruthless, with a reputation for making careers and breaking them with equal ease. He took an interest in me from my first week at the firm, mentoring me, challenging me, pushing me to be better than I thought I could be. I was flattered by his attention, then dependent on it, then something else entirely. Our relationship crossed professional boundaries slowly, then suddenly, then completely. He was separated from his wife, or so he told me. He was going to leave her as soon as the time was right, or so he promised. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because his world was even more dazzling than the one I had already entered, because being with him made me feel like I had truly arrived. I was 30 years old, and I thought I had everything figured out. I didn't know that the universe was about to present me with a bill for all my choices, and the payment would cost me more than I could ever afford. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon in March. I was in a meeting with Marcus, reviewing documents for a major acquisition, when my assistant knocked on the door with an expression I had never seen on her face. My mother was on the line. It was urgent. I almost told her to take a message. That is how far I had fallen. That my first instinct when my mother called with urgent news was annoyance at the interruption. But something in my assistant's eyes made me pick up the phone, and what I heard next shattered the carefully constructed world I had built around myself. My father had collapsed at the factory. They thought it was a heart attack. He was in surgery. It was serious. I needed to come home. I should have been on a plane within the hour. That is what any decent daughter would have done. That is what Daniel did, leaving his own job without a second thought. That is what Sarah did, driving through the night to reach the hospital before dawn. But I hesitated. I looked at Marcus, at the documents spread across the table, at the deal that was supposed to make my career, and I hesitated. The acquisition was scheduled to close in 48 hours. If I left now, someone else would take over. Someone else would get the credit. Someone else would be positioned for partner, while I was sitting in a hospital in Ohio, watching my father recover from a surgery he would probably survive anyway. Heart attacks were common. People survived them all the time. My father was strong. He would understand. He had always understood. I told my mother I would try to come as soon as I could. I told her to keep me updated. I told her I loved her and that everything would be okay. Then, I hung up the phone and went back to the meeting. The acquisition closed successfully 2 days later. I was named partner 3 months after that, the youngest woman in the firm's history to achieve that position. Marcus took me to dinner to celebrate, ordering champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent, telling me I had proven myself, that I was everything he had seen in me from the beginning. I smiled and accepted his praise and tried not to think about the 47 text messages from Daniel that I had ignored. My father had survived the surgery, barely. He was in a medically induced coma for 8 days. When he finally woke up, I was told, the first thing he asked for was me. Where was Becca? Was Becca there? Could someone bring Becca to see him? They had to tell him I wasn't there. They had to explain that I was working, that I was busy, that I would come soon. My mother made excuses for me, the way she always had. My brother did not. Daniel called me that night, his voice shaking with a rage I had never heard from him, and said words I will never forget. He said I was dead to him. He said I had abandoned our father in his hour of need. He said he didn't care if I ever came home again. Then he hung up, and I sat in my beautiful apartment, in my beautiful life, and felt something crack inside my chest that has never fully healed. I finally went home 3 weeks later, when my father was out of the hospital and recovering at home. I told myself I had been right to wait. The crisis was over. My presence now was what mattered. I brought expensive gifts for everyone, wines and gadgets, and things they couldn't pronounce and didn't want. I swept into my parents' modest house like a visiting dignitary, expecting gratitude and receiving something much worse. Silence, disappointment, a weariness so profound it seemed to fill every room. My father was pale and thin, a shadow of the man who had lifted me onto his shoulders at county fairs, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had worked double shifts to pay for my law school applications. He hugged me when I arrived, held me close like he used to when I was a child, and said he was glad I could make it. But there was something missing in his voice, some spark that I had always taken for granted. He never said he was hurt that I hadn't come sooner. He never asked for an explanation. He just looked at me with those tired eyes, and somehow that was so much worse than anger. Daniel wouldn't speak to me at all. He came and went from the house, checking on our father, helping with medications, doing all the things I should have been doing, and acted as if I wasn't there. Sarah tried to play peacemaker, the role she had always occupied in our family. But even she seemed different, guarded, careful, like she was waiting for me to disappoint her again and didn't want to be surprised when I did. I stayed for 3 days, 3 awkward, painful days, and then I made up an excuse about work and flew back to New York. I told myself things would improve with time. I told myself they would forgive me eventually. I told myself that once my father was fully recovered, once my partnership was secure, once Marcus and I were finally together properly, I would make more time for family. I would repair what had been damaged. I would become the daughter and sister they deserved. These were all lies, of course. I knew it even as I told them to myself. But I had become so good at lying that I couldn't stop even when there was no one left to deceive. The second call came 11 months later. My father had suffered another heart attack, more severe than the first. This time the doctor said there was nothing more they could do. He was conscious but fading. If I wanted to say goodbye, I needed to come now. I was in court when my mother called, in the middle of cross-examining a witness, in full view of the judge and the jury and the opposing counsel. I saw my phone light up with her name, and I silenced it. I finished my cross-examination. I won my motion. I walked out of that courtroom a victor, and by the time I checked my messages, my father was gone. He had died at 4:17 in the afternoon, surrounded by my mother, my brother, my sister, and an empty chair where I should have been. His last words, Sarah told me later, were about me. He said he loved his Becca. He said he was proud of her. He said he knew she would have been there if she could. He died believing the best about me, even though I had given him every reason not to. And that grace, that undeserved, unconditional grace, broke something inside me that will never be repaired. I did not handle my father's death with dignity. I did not grieve the way a loving daughter should. Instead, I descended into a kind of madness, throwing myself into work with even more intensity, as if I could outrun the guilt by burying it under billable hours. Marcus grew distant during this time, frustrated by my emotional volatility, by the cracks that were appearing in my carefully polished facade. Our relationship, I began to realize, had always been transactional. He wanted the bright young star who would make him look good. He had no interest in the broken woman who cried in bathrooms and flinched whenever her phone rang. By the time I discovered he had started seeing another associate at the firm, a younger version of what I used to be, I barely had the energy to be surprised. I confronted him in his office, expecting at least the courtesy of an apology, and received instead a cold reminder that we had never made any promises. I had been useful. Now I was complicated. He wished me well, but thought it best if we maintained professional distance going forward. I walked out of his office and went straight to the restroom, where I threw up everything in my stomach and then sat on the cold tile floor, wondering how I had let my life come to this. The funeral was the worst day of my existence. I flew home expecting hostility and found something far more painful. My family was kind to me, polite, welcoming even. They made sure I had a seat in the front row. They included me in the planning. They thanked me for the extravagant flower arrangement I had sent. But there was a distance between us now, a chasm so wide I could barely see them on the other side. Daniel delivered the eulogy, a beautiful tribute to a man who had given everything for his family. He talked about our father's dedication to the factory, to the workers, to the community. He talked about family dinners and fishing trips and the way Dad always had time for anyone who needed him. He talked about how Dad had hoped the business would stay in the family, how he had dreamed of passing it down to his children, of watching his legacy continue through the people he loved most. He never mentioned me by name, not once. I sat in the front row at my own father's funeral and listened to my brother give a eulogy that erased me from our family history. And I could not even be angry, because I knew I had erased myself. After the service, when the mourners were milling about and sharing stories and eating casseroles that neighbors had brought, my mother pulled me aside. She looked older than I remembered, aged by grief and the months of caring for a dying husband. She took my hands in hers, the same hands that had held mine when I was a child, and she said something I will never forget. She said she forgave me. She said she knew I had made choices that took me far from home. And she understood that I was living a different life. And she didn't blame me for becoming someone she didn't always recognize. But she also said that I needed to forgive myself, because carrying this guilt would destroy me. And she had already lost a husband and didn't want to lose a daughter too. She said my father loved me until his last breath. And that love didn't disappear just because I wasn't there to receive it. Then she hugged me, and I sobbed into her shoulder like I was 5 years old again. And for just a moment, I felt like I might survive this after all. But survival and healing are different things. I returned to New York after the funeral and found that everything had changed. The firm that had once seemed like the pinnacle of achievement now felt like a prison. The apartment that had represented my success now felt like a mausoleum, filled with expensive things that meant nothing. Marcus avoided me in meetings, his new protégé hanging on his every word the way I once had. I looked at her and saw myself, younger and hungrier, and utterly unaware of what she was sacrificing for a future that would never deliver what it promised. I wanted to warn her. I wanted to tell her to run, to go home, to hold on to the people who loved her before it was too late. But I knew she wouldn't listen. I hadn't listened. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The reckoning came 6 months after my father's death. I was in a partners meeting discussing strategy for the upcoming year when I received a text from my brother. It was the first time he had contacted me directly since our father died. The factory was in trouble. Orders were down. Key employees were leaving. Without Dad's leadership, without his relationships with clients, without his tireless work ethic holding everything together, the business was failing. Daniel had been trying to save it, but he wasn't our father. He didn't have the experience or the connections or the decades of institutional knowledge that had made the factory successful. He was reaching out to me as a last resort. He needed legal advice. He needed financial guidance. He needed someone with my skills and connections to help him navigate a crisis that was threatening to destroy everything our father had built. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I put my phone away and returned to the meeting, where I listened to colleagues discuss quarterly projections and client retention and other things that suddenly seemed utterly meaningless. That night, I went home and looked around my apartment with new eyes. I saw the artwork I had bought because it was expensive, not because I loved it. I saw the furniture I had chosen because it photographed well for social media. I saw a life that looked impressive from the outside, but was hollow at its core, a beautiful shell with nothing living inside. I thought about my father, about the factory, about 200 workers in a small Ohio town who were about to lose their jobs because I had been too selfish to come home when I was needed. I thought about Daniel, swallowing his pride to reach out to the sister who had betrayed them all. I thought about my mother, alone in that empty house, trying to make sense of a world without her husband. And I made a decision that would change everything. I resigned from the firm the following week. My colleagues were shocked. Marcus was dismissive, probably relieved to have me out of his orbit. But I didn't care about their reactions anymore. I sold my apartment and most of my possessions. I packed what remained into a rental car and drove 12 hours back to Ohio, to the town I had spent 20 years trying to escape, to the family I had spent a lifetime taking for granted. Daniel was waiting on the porch when I arrived, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't hug me. He didn't say welcome home. He just looked at me for a long moment and then asked if I was ready to work. I said yes. It was the most honest thing I had said in years. The next 2 years were the hardest of my life and also the most meaningful. I threw myself into saving the factory with the same intensity I had once devoted to closing deals. But this time the stakes were personal. I renegotiated contracts with suppliers. I found new clients in industries my father had never explored. I modernized operations, implemented new technologies, and slowly, painfully, turned the business around. Daniel and I worked side by side, barely speaking at first, then grudgingly cooperating, then finally, gradually, rebuilding the relationship that my choices had nearly destroyed. It took years for him to trust me again. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when I thought the damage was too deep to repair. But we persisted because we were Thorntons, and Thorntons didn't give up on each other. That's what our father had taught us, even if I had forgotten the lesson for too long. My mother became my closest confidant during this time. She didn't dwell on my failures or remind me of my absences. She simply welcomed me home, made me coffee in the mornings, asked about my day at the factory, and treated me like the daughter I had always been, even when I didn't feel like I deserved it. Her forgiveness was a gift I will never fully understand. I had expected punishment, expected to earn my way back through suffering and sacrifice. Instead, I received grace, freely given, without conditions or expectations. It didn't erase my guilt. Nothing could erase my guilt. But it gave me something to build on, a foundation of love that had never wavered, even when I had done everything possible to destroy it. Sarah became my ally in unexpected ways. She helped me reconnect with the community, introducing me to people I had forgotten or never known, giving me a chance to become part of this place I had once despised. I started coaching a youth debate team at the local high school, passing on some of what I had learned in all those years of legal combat. I joined the board of a nonprofit that helped unemployed workers find new jobs. I became, slowly and imperfectly, a citizen of my hometown, not just a temporary visitor waiting to escape again. The work wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with corner offices or champagne celebrations or profiles in business magazines. But it meant something. It mattered to people who could look me in the eye and tell me exactly how it had helped them. And that, I discovered, was worth more than all the deals I had ever closed. The guilt never left. I want to be clear about that. Even now, 8 years after my father's death, I still wake some nights with his face in my mind, wondering what he would think of the person I've become. I still flinch when I see fathers and daughters together, remembering all the moments I missed. I still carry the weight of those choices, the knowledge that I could have been there and wasn't, that I chose myself over my family when they needed me most. That guilt is my companion now, not my enemy. I have learned to use it as a compass, to let it guide me toward better choices, to honor my father's memory by becoming the daughter he always believed I could be. Daniel and I are partners now, officially. The factory is thriving, employing even more people than it did in my father's time. We added his name to the entrance last year, William Thornton Memorial Manufacturing. When I see those words, I feel both pride and sorrow, an acknowledgement of what was lost and what remains. My brother and I still don't agree on everything. We still argue about strategy and priorities and the best way to honor our father's legacy. But we do it together, as family, the way it should have been all along. Marcus reached out to me once, about 3 years after I left. He was between firms, his reputation somewhat tarnished by a series of poor decisions, and he wondered if I might have connections that could help him. I stared at his message for a long time, remembering the woman I had been when I worshipped him, when I sacrificed everything on the altar of his approval. Then I deleted the message without responding. Some doors are meant to stay closed,